Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Are you thinking about taking an English proficiency test to check your language level? Or do you need the results for a job, to move to another country, or to start university? Two of the most important, well-respected, and popular exams are TOEFL and IELTS. Which one should you take? Let's talk about it in this episode of Thinking in English. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And check out my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and some bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. To naturalise. To naturalise. To make someone a legal citizen of a country that they were not born in. For example, my sister is a naturalised US citizen. Acronym. Acronym. An acronym is an abbreviation consisting of the first letters of each word in the name of something, and it is pronounced as a word. For example, IELTS is an acronym for International English Language Testing System. Specific. Specific. Relating to one thing and not others. It's a synonym for particular. For instance, the virus attacks specific cells in the brain. Proficiency. Proficiency. The fact of having the skill and experience for doing something. As in, that organization requires employees to have proficiency in at least 2 different languages. In a nutshell. In a nutshell. This idiom means very briefly, giving only the main points. For example, what went wrong? In a nutshell, everything. To type. To type. To write using a machine, either a computer keyboard or a typewriter. For example, she asked me to type a couple of letters. Contrasting. Contrasting. Very different. As in, that artist likes to use contrasting colors in his paintings. Airport fiction. Or maybe airport novel. Airport fiction is a genre of literature that is commonly sold at airports. It's fairly long and fast-paced. You read these books for the plot and the fast pace, not for the style of writing. It's not going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, but it's a fun thing to read. For example, she only likes to read airport fiction. To reiterate. To reiterate. To say something again, once, or several times. For example, she reiterated that she had never seen him before. So, you've been listening to my podcast for a while now, studying English regularly, and you want to test your ability or level. Or maybe you have an amazing job offer in a foreign country, or an opportunity to enroll in an English language university program. Or maybe you have been living in an English-speaking country for a long time already, and you want to naturalize your citizenship. Well, one thing common with all of these different options is the need to take an English language exam. However, which exam should you take? There are so many different tests to choose from. IELTS, IELTS, TOEFL, PTE, the Duolingo test, the Cambridge English exams, and hundreds of different regional and national exams around the world, such as the Japanese Eiken. There are a lot of complicated acronyms and boring test names that I probably pronounced wrong. Each test has different benefits, requirements, and purposes. Some are accepted everywhere, some maybe just for one place or in one country. However, today I'm going to introduce the two most famous, popular, and important exams: the Test of English as a Foreign Language, or TOEFL, and the International English Language Testing System, or IELTS. IELTS and TOEFL are generally considered the most commonly accepted exams for the English language entry requirements in academic settings. Basically, they're the two top tier exams. They're accepted everywhere. TOEFL is an exam provided by a US based company, while IELTS is supervised by the University of Cambridge in the UK. IELTS is also commonly used for visa applications in countries like Canada and Australia. In fact, there are two versions of IELTS: the IELTS Academic and IELTS General Training, which have slightly different purposes. So, which one should you choose to take, IELTS or TOEFL? What are the differences between the two tests? And what do I recommend? There are some key points to consider before you make a decision over which exam to choose. Obviously, if the place you are moving to, the company you are applying to, or the university you are entering requires a specific exam, then that must be the exam you take. If your new job requires IELTS and they write IELTS, you clearly need to take IELTS, not TOEFL. However, if there are a few options available or no specific requirement, you need to think about your strengths, weaknesses, and learning style when choosing which exam to take. The first thing to consider is whether or not you need to take an English proficiency test for academic English. Do you need a qualification to enter a university or a school? If you don't need it for academic purposes, you should take the general version of IELTS. The IELTS General Training exam is significantly easier than the academic version and the TOEFL. So it is perfect if you need it for visas or immigration purposes. If you do need a test for academic reasons, both IELTS and TOEFL are good options. You should check out episode 76 of my podcast for my guide to the differences between academic, business, and conversational English, which is kind of the same difference between the two IELTS exams. The next point to consider is which type of English are you most comfortable with? Have you been studying British English or North American English? I made a guide on the differences between British and American English a few months ago, which you all should listen to. It is linked in the description and on the blog. But in a nutshell, if you have more experience with British English accents and vocabulary, you should take the IELTS exam. As IELTS is a British-based exam, it generally tends towards British English. And I guess also if you studied in Australia or New Zealand or Ireland, perhaps the IELTS exam is better. On the other hand, TOEFL is far more suitable for learners of American English, as it's an American-based exam. The next thing to think about is what kind of exam do you like? Or what kind of exam are you best at taking? What do I mean? Well, there are some key differences between the question styles and ways of answering in each exam. Obviously, TOEFL and IELTS both test the four key skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. However, they do so in different ways. If you like to type your assignments and essay responses, you should consider TOEFL, as they require a typed answer for the written section. IELTS instead requires you to handwrite your answers. Furthermore, IELTS has a wide range of question types, including matching exercises, filling gaps, and multiple choice, while TOEFL is almost completely multiple choice. So if you don't like multiple choice questions, maybe don't take the TOEFL exam. And finally, the TOEFL exam is 4 hours long. That's quite a long exam, while IELTS is just under 3 hours. So these differences make for two exams very contrasting experiences to take. So, what are the major differences between each section or each skill of the exam? Let's start with reading. In many ways, IELTS and TOEFL reading are quite similar in structure. Both are academic in nature, so make sure you are reading articles from respected newspapers, magazines, and blogs to practice. If you just read cheap airport fiction or tabloid newspapers, you will not be prepared to take either test. TOEFL has 3 to 5 reading sections, taking about 20 minutes each, while IELTS has 3 sections that take 20 minutes each again. The big difference, as I already mentioned, is the question types. TOEFL just uses multiple choice, while IELTS is far more varied. In the writing parts of the exam, both tests have 2 different tasks. IELTS starts with a short essay of about 200 words, and then you need to summarize some information from a graph or a chart. In TOEFL, the first task is a 5-paragraph essay of between 300 and 350 words. The second task in TOEFL requires you to take notes from a set of readings and lectures on one topic, and then you need to respond by incorporating information from both the reading and listening parts. Speaking of listening, there are big differences between IELTS and TOEFL. In fact, the listening differences are probably the biggest differences. TOEFL requires you to listen to up to 60 minutes of conversations and lectures. You need to take notes and then respond to multiple choice questions. IELTS again has a wider selection of question types, which you need to answer as you move through the exam. So just to reiterate, in TOEFL, you answer questions after you have listened to a long selection, while in IELTS, you answer questions while you are listening to the exam. So note-taking is a very important skill to practice, especially if you are taking TOEFL. And finally, there is the speaking part. This again is vastly different between the two tests. TOEFL requires you to answer 6 questions by recording responses on the computer. IELTS has a slightly shorter speaking test, but you are examined by a real-life human examiner instead of a computer. You first warm up with a little small talk, and then need to respond to an image of some kind, and then discuss a related topic. So here is today's final thought. In this episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to show you all the key differences between IELTS and TOEFL. These are the 2 most important and widely accepted English proficiency tests, with different question types and language types. If you like writing or handwriting your answers, speaking British English, and answering a variety of different questions, then IELTS may be more suitable. If you like American English, computer-based exams, and multiple choice questions, perhaps you should look at taking TOEFL. However, the choice is completely up to you. Both are great exams, so whichever you take should be fine for most purposes. Just make sure you know the differences. Have you ever taken an English proficiency exam? Which would you prefer to take, IELTS or TOEFL? Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review or rating, recommend it to your friends, or let me know on Instagram. My Instagram is Thinking in English Podcast. The link should be in the description. And make sure you check out the Thinking in English blog. I love hearing from listeners, and I really appreciate all of the messages I have received over the past few months. Feel free to send me a message or give me some advice or recommend a topic. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.